What's going on, guys? Dr. Andrew Fix back for another episode on the code. Thank you so much for joining me this morning, this afternoon, whenever you're tuning in to listen to this. As you know, we really appreciate your time tuning in to catch us on this episode, and very excited to be bringing yet another awesome interview to you guys. My buddy, Dr. Tim Zittle, owner of TreeHive, a chiropractic office in Parker, Colorado, is joining us today. And we're just super excited to get into this relatively like informal, not too structured conversation, all about personal development, health, and we're just going to jam back and forth a little bit. So, Dr. Tim, thank you so much for joining me this morning, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this will be great. And hopefully the sound quality is good for you guys. We're using a pair of headphones today instead of my normal microphone. A lot of family and other things going on in our house, so there wasn't a quiet spot. So we've got a new backdrop today if you're catching us on YouTube. But Tim, I mentioned that you own and operate a chiropractic office in Parker, Colorado. But if you could just give us a little bit more of an introduction, background about yourself. I know, like me, you moved out here to Colorado. So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I was born a baby in Baltimore, Maryland, and grew up, in that area. And then we moved around a lot when I was a kid. So I got to experience life from a lot of different angles. Did high school and undergrad in Virginia Beach, Virginia, and then went to Atlanta for my doctorate program. And for me, I knew healthcare was going to be a big part of my life early on. I saw a movie when I think I was 11 or 12 years old. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And it was called Patch Adams, and Robin Williams played the lead. And that movie changed, like forever altered the course of my life. There was a moment in there. I was kind of a weird kid growing up, I'll admit. And there was a moment in there where he's being taught, and this guy, after having, not to spoil it for anyone who hasn't seen the movie, but he's lost in life, looking for some type of purpose later in life, and ends up deciding he wants to go to medical school and become a doctor. And while he's there, there's a scene in the movie that's really pivotal for me. And it's where the dean of the school comes in, and he says, people are going to come to you. I'm going to brutally paraphrase this. People are going to come to you in their moment of greatest need, and they're going to say, doctor, cut me open, right? And what that represented to me was this incredible vulnerability that bypasses all of our social safeguards. And so all of the connection and the legacy and the impact that I'd been looking to make when I was a kid, and I really wanted to make a difference. And I thought, man, what a better way to do that than being able to help people in an area of great need. And I don't know of an area of greater need than their health. And so
Mm.
it's funny. I actually started out in physical therapy. I was a physical therapist assistant in a spine center, helping people recover from spinal surgeries. And it was, I mean, I think going into that, when a lot of people hear that, they think of like 60, 70, 80-year olds who are, on their last leg of life in their glory days, and they're just trying to buy themselves an extra couple years of comfort or functionality.
Yeah.
And what I really found was it was a lot of like 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds who had had, a stress fracture, they had a sports injury, or they were in a car crash. And instead of going through physical therapy first, right, chiropractic first, they were getting sent straight to surgery as like a first option. Like, let's just go
Yeah.
right to this. And it was wrecking their lives. Like, people were coming out of these surgeries, and their quality of life at best was going to be 50%, 60% of the function that they had before this injury. And so at this point, we're literally just trying to help them get back to like a quality of life where they can like get around the house, much less like they were never going to get back into sports again, never going to travel again, never going to be comfortable again. And that really stuck with me. And I loved caring for them and being able to be a point of care. But I was like, man, there's got to be a better way than this. And so when it came time to go into school, I was looking at different programs, and I was totally torn down the middle between PT and cardiology. I had become fascinated in undergrad with like the study of the heart and blood flow. I was super into it.
Mm.
And I started looking at all these programs and applying. And in the middle of this process, as I was like getting accepted, and it was almost like, some people, they applied all these programs, and then they're like, oh no, like I'm not getting accepted. I don't know what to do. And I know that for guys like you and me, it's like when you get accepted to more than one, then you're like, oh no, what do I do?
What do I
Right? Like,
choose?
what
Yeah.
do I
Yeah.
choose? So I was in a total dilemma. And and at that moment, I had some childhood friends of ours, who were chiropractors, and they were on the board of directors at what I didn't know at the time was the largest chiropractic school in the world in Atlanta. and they said, hey, this is kind of like a last minute ad here. We really think you should check out chiropractic. And
Mm.
I know a ton about it. We had never been adjusted regularly growing up. We like got spot checked. And so I was like, okay. And I went and checked out this school literally over a weekend. And I was like, holy cow, like there's something to this. I don't know a lot about it, but this is fascinating. I really love this. And I loved it because for the first time, I really understood the role of the nervous system in whole body holistic health.
Hmm.
And nobody had ever told me that before. When I was in PT at this spine center, we were fixing the spine, but it was so much more of like a, we're fixing the spine so that this person can walk up steps. We're, fixing the spine so that this person has less pain, right? And then in cardiology, again, it's like we are focused on one thing, and that's the heart and the heart only, or blood flow, right? Blood flow only. So I'm looking at this now and I'm like, no, we're looking at this thing that could affect whole
Whole
body
body.
function, health, like everything benefits. And I was like, that is so fascinating. So literally last second, I pulled like a total 180, switched into chiropractic school and showed up for school in Atlanta. First day of school, had no clue what I was getting myself into. And yeah, just really gradually fell in love with it. And I loved it too, because coming from the background of physical therapy, I had been exposed to, at the time, was much more bloody of a turf war between physical therapists and chiropractors. Um, and I got to have such a deep respect for both sides and how they can work together,
Hmm.
as opposed to like why, if PTs were always saying chiros were stealing their patients and chiros were always saying PTs are trying to steal their patients. And I was like, no, like there's a place for everybody in this. Like there's such a beautiful relationship here. And that afforded me some really unique opportunities,
Hmm.
and partnerships throughout school to learn,
Hmm.
how to not only practice chiropractic, but to do so in a way that was inviting, like a team of providers into the conversation, which was relatively new at that time. And thankfully, that's a conversation that's growing and people are being encouraged to do that more, which is obviously to the benefit of the patient. But at that point in time, it was about the benefit of the doctor. And so, um, going through that experience and learning all about chiropractic, learning about the body and the nervous system and all that was really transformational for me. And then, graduated from chiropractic school. First practice was in Auburn, Alabama. Was there for a couple years, and then went to Columbus, Ohio, started to practice there. And with some friends, really, really beautiful experience. And then decided 5 years ago to move to Colorado. This really felt like a place I wanted to be, the Wild West. I'd been out here when I was a kid and loved it. And I was like, man, yeah, I'm just going to take the leap and go out there. And so came out here with just a hope and a dream, and we opened TreeHive and was able to be surrounded by some really incredible people. I found our networking group that we're a part of like really
Right.
early on. Just all of those different things created this beautiful community that's now become TreeHive. And I'm so proud of it. But I think one of the things I'm most proud of is, unlike some of my other business opportunities where it's kind of been like, I'm going to take this thing on and see it through, I really deeply love most about TreeHive that it's a group effort. Like this is really a community for a community.
Hmm.
And it hasn't been on the back of only my efforts. It's been just about bringing the right people together in the right places in the right times, and creating the right partnerships that's allowed it to thrive. And so it's been really, really beautiful of an experience, and a lot of fun getting to this point. Learned a ton over the last decade.
Yeah,
Continue to do so, right? I don't think we're ever done. But
that's for
anyways,
sure.
long story long, I don't know if that answers your question.
No, no, that was great. And I think, we'll dive into some of those things that you've learned, I think, over the last decade, but to, kind of piggyback or add into some of the things that you said, one of the things that I'm so passionate about, you're so passionate about, is when we get the opportunity to work with individuals and impact their health. One, we're not doing it for them, right? We're a resource, we're a guide. But two, we want to look at things from a whole person, whole body perspective. And so many of the specialties out there in healthcare, in the medicine, are so focused on like one thing, right? You're an
Yeah.
ENT, you're a cardiologist, you're a pulmonologist, you're a podiatrist, like whatever that might be. And, what we oftentimes see in those scenarios is they may address something, or the client may have something addressed, but then that's going to impact other things throughout their body that can't get addressed in that individual's office. But then that client may not get the experience of working with someone who can really tie that all together. And I think that's really the way, it feels like it's moving that way very slowly, but I think that's the way medicine is moving very slowly
Yeah.
towards, is let's impact the entire body and keep in mind how the entire body is impacted by the choices and decisions that we make.
Yeah.
Um,
That's it.
Yeah.
And one of the best examples or analogies I like to use to describe this in the way that we're shifting in that way, or that I hope we keep shifting,
Mhm.
is, you know, obviously let's just say somebody has to get to work, right? Or maybe you're listening to this on your way to work, or you've just come home from work, right? What we use to get to and from these places is we use a car. And what does a car need to get you from point A to point B? It needs a wheel, it needs, you know, a door, it needs windows, an engine, right? It needs parts, right? And then it also needs gas, it needs electricity, right? Like it needs power, it needs fuel. But a lot of times we only think of the fact that it's like the car needs all those things, and we forget or neglect to understand the fact that it needs information. If it has no driver, that car is useless. It cannot go anywhere. And it's the same thing with a computer, right? A computer needs parts, it needs keyboard, you know, screen, all those things. It needs power, it needs electricity, and it needs information. It needs an operating system. And
Mhm.
when we look at the human body, it needs those same three things. It needs parts, it needs power and fuel, and it needs information. And what we're really, really good at in our current healthcare society is we're really good at parts, right? That's what every doctor we have is for parts, right? You got a liver problem, you see the liver doc. You got a big toe problem, you see the big toe doc, right? Like every part of the body has a doctor. Then when you turn on the power conversation, this is something that we're rapidly advancing in. But even your average medical doctor is on average in their entire medical program will receive between 4 to 6 hours of
Yeah.
nutritional education and consult, right? And a lot of
Yep.
people go on beyond that, right? But then it's like, you know, even people that are more interested in that or get a little bit more schooling in that, like PT and chiropractic, where they realize the importance of nutrition and fuel, even us, we still don't get enough of that information, which is why we need nutritionists, we need dietitians, right? We
Hmm.
need these individuals here because they're totally focused on the power. But what is almost always or often neglected is the information. And
Yeah.
that's where PTs like you and what you're doing at Physio Room is changing the game. Because if we do not look at the controlling system body, the operating system of the body, you could have flawless parts and you could be chock full of power and fuel, and your body will not know how to operate that or use it efficiently and effectively. You're still going to have all those problems.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's in a way sort of the like intersection point that we are coming to is, and we talk about this amongst our team at Physio Room, that not that we don't want to continue to be lifelong learners that you mentioned and, continue to grow and get better at our craft and our profession. But in order for us to continue to impact people in a more and more powerful way, we don't really need the people that we currently have on our team. We don't really need to be that much better physical therapists. Our team is good. But what we will continue to need to do better and better job of is communicating with people and, um, you know, building this understanding where I like to use the phrase, we are quarterbacking someone's health and wellness, right? And it's more than just about the parts and the fuel, like you mentioned. It's how do they manage their life? How do they manage their stress? How is their mind wrapped up in the identity that they have tied with the activity that they do, right? Just like if someone asks you, oh, Andrew, Tim, what do you do? Oh, well, I'm a physical therapist, right? Like we identify with things. I'm a runner, I'm a cyclist, I'm a whatever. And there's a huge psychological and nervous system component involved in all this. Um, so I guess just talk on that for just a minute. So at TreeHive, you guys, and whenever I hear you talk or one of your team members talk, one of the things that you guys always make a point to say is that we are your nervous system focused chiropractor. So what do you guys mean by that? And how does that differ from one of the other thousands and thousands of chiropractic offices that someone will see as they're driving on their way to work, and they'll see a couple chiropractic offices along the way?
Yeah, great question. Well, first I'll say, I think chiropractic is beautiful. It's a blessing and a curse from an educational standpoint because it's so diverse. There's over 300 different chiropractic techniques,
Mm,
and there's that many because they all work, right? It's not a technique if it's not going to get you results. So they all work. It's a challenge when it comes to educating because there can be so much difference. You know, someone could go to a chiropractor their whole life and then go see another chiropractor and have a completely different experience.
yeah.
Where we are working to educate people is, for the longest time, people thought of chiropractors like general contractors, right? Spine broke, we fix, right? Like really more like the cavemen of of healthcare from a standpoint of, put bone back in the right place.
Hmm.
And what we've come to find out in the science is that the actual foundation of nervous system dysfunction isn't even a vertebrae that's out of place. I see people with spines all the time that have scoliosis. And they're in no way, shape, or form affecting their functionality, right? So we've really had to separate, and this isn't just my philosophy. This is literally what we found in the science and the research is there's this old notion that if a bone is out of place, it puts, hard bone puts pressure on soft nerve, creates nerve interference, right? And that nerve gets pinched right in between those bones. And we know from science that's actually not the case. What happens is when a joint gets stuck, joints need to be movable, right? When a joint gets stuck, and most importantly, when it gets stuck, it usually gets stuck out of position. When it gets stuck out of position, what it does is it creates inflammation, it creates swelling. And the inflammation and the swelling from that dysfunctional joint is what creates the pressure, damage, or irritation for the nervous system and the surrounding tissue. So then automatically we're going from a standpoint of structure and pain to more function and dysfunction, which is already a huge leap forward when it comes to chiropractic and really all healthcare. This is where we step in and start educating people because your average chiropractor when you go in and you lay down on their table, they feel up your spine, they just look for that stuck area and boom, they're going to make a twist, pop, and crack to get that stuck thing moving.
Hmm.
It's not that that's not a benefit. Getting anything that's stuck and not supposed to be stuck moving is a benefit. Don't get me
Sure.
wrong. But there's a deeper level of intentionality that can exist to get better results in a shorter period of time. And more importantly, to work with the body instead of against the body. So much of what we do, and this is an area where I've actually been deeply inspired by some of the work that you've done and being a patient of yours, getting to see you in action and like working through this with me and some of my injuries. It showed me how much of the body compensates for the real issue. And so often we're going straight to these points of compensation where we can feel the most pain
Right.
and we're trying to cover up the issue without seeing this is the chain reaction. And if we just went and fixed the source, that chain reaction will fix itself. It will go away when it doesn't need to be there anymore. And so when we apply this to chiropractic, we apply this to the nervous system, we call ourselves neurologically based or nervous system focused chiropractors. Essentially, what we're doing is we're using analysis and we're using a technique that is based on nervous system function. So I use reflexes, which are nerve signals, direct nerve feedback signals, to check and see where the nervous system is dysfunctional. That I trust far more than me just feeling around for something that's stuck. When I see the difference in nerve functionality, it allows me to pinpoint with accuracy the areas of the nervous system that are damaged, irritated, or inflamed. And when we can restore proper function in the nervous system by triggering a positive nerve response, we can calm the inflammation, decrease the inflammation, increase that part of the nervous system that's responsible for rest and recover as opposed to that fight or flight.
Hmm.
And when we do that, we decrease systemic overall body inflammation. When body inflammation goes down, swelling goes down. When swelling goes down, the body goes into healing and recovery mode,
Yeah.
as opposed to being in this state of chronic stress, right? That old dirty S word
Hmm.
and that's really where, again, we found people go wrong with their health is we've been told that health is really about how can you fix it the fastest and easiest. And so we look at frames of healthcare, especially preventative healthcare, and we say that's an added responsibility or chore that I don't need. And in our office, we're trying to educate people, hey, our goal is not to say, hey, let's take off all this stress from your nervous system and here's a new one, right? Like that doesn't make any sense. It's really to educate people on the fact that investing in your health in small, consistent ways is going to provide you a way greater investment and save you stress down the road by counteracting that stress when it happens instead of letting it pile up and going into breakdown.
Oh man, totally. Speaking of stress, I think as we're talking about the nervous system, and we may stumble into a conversation about development and mindset. I just feel like stress levels for virtually everybody that I talk to are just continuing to be on the rise, and it's just going up and up and up. And I don't exactly see any dramatic slowdown in sight. What do you think? What do you see?
Yeah, it's really unfortunate to be honest with you. It's probably one of the greatest as a healthcare provider, any healthcare provider. it's the greatest enemy that we have right now. The research is showing the average 30-year-old in today's society has experienced the same amount of life stress as a 70-year-old from the 50s and 60s. And a large part of that is obviously advances in technology that allows us to be more productive, right? Which essentially just means working harder and harder and harder to try and achieve more.
Yep.
Advances in technology and media have also led to lots more stress from an emotional and mental standpoint, whether it's like music we're listening to or movies we're watching or social media itself and the interactions that we can encounter or our vast access to news, the large majority of which is always negative because that's what creates the headlines. So we're being bombarded in ways we've never been, unprecedented amounts of stress we're
Yeah.
being exposed to. And that's really where the research comes in and says, for most people, what happens because of how powerful our brain is our brain creates physical responses to even imagined or perceived threats. The
Hmm.
majority of the stress that will break our body down is not even physical stress right now. It is stress that we are hearing about, we are thinking about, even stress we are imagining that may never happen. That stress is breaking our body down as if we are experiencing all of those things in real time due to chemical and hormone shifts that occur when we're exposed to the stress or those ideas. And for that reason, they're now saying about 90% of all doctors' visits this year will be stress related in some way, shape, or form, regardless of what the symptom is. So the real conversation and one that we're inviting people into, and I know you guys are as well, is what are things you can do to better manage and offset your daily and weekly stress? And if we could really create movement and awareness around that conversation, we would see far less sick days. We would see far more productivity. We would see all of the things that we truly want for ourselves. We would see by managing our stress better as opposed to just trying to fix ourselves when we're stressed.
Yeah, 100%. And you already started to go down the conversation of being proactive with our health rather than reactive. And I think the same thing is so important with stress. I think you don't have to look any farther than every single psychotherapist that I know has a schedule that is completely booked. They have no openings for weeks. My
Right.
82-year-old grandmother is a psychotherapist. She still works. Her schedule is booked for weeks. And she has no intention of retiring because she just feels like, man, I don't want to take myself away from these clients that they need and value this time.
Right.
That people are dealing with a huge amount of stress. But I don't think, like you just so eloquently laid out, I don't think we always think about the physical ramifications of that and how that stress impacts all of the systems in our body, whether we're talking about the GI, whether we're talking about our skin, whether we're talking about our joints and our muscles, our tissues. It impacts all of those things. And, on this show, we talk about sleep, we talk about stress management, like we're getting into movement, nutrition, and community or relationships. And what I would love to do to like continue this conversation is have you lay out a couple maybe like tactical things that people could start doing today or this week as ways to manage and combat some of this stress that they might be dealing with and that they surely are, because we all have some form of stress, right? Some level of stress. Some people is different than others. It might be financial, might be familial, might be something else. But what can people start to do besides saying like, oh, we need you to sleep more, oh, we need you to eat better? But like, what are some legitimate tactical things that people can start doing to start to manage this stress better and combat it so that we can see their health benefit in a positive way?
Yeah, great question. Obviously, there's a long list, and you've
Huge.
named some of them. I would say a couple of my favorites are number one, laughter.
Mm.
I love encouraging people to do things that make them laugh or giggle. It is one of the best ways to activate the vagus nerve because of the involvement of your throat and the nerves and muscles around the throat when you laugh, especially like deep laughter. It is one of the best therapies I know. It's good for blood pressure. It's good for increasing, neuroendocrine secretions to the brain, right? There's so many benefits to laughter. So when I'm in the car, I often will listen to stand-up comedy, right? In addition
Mm.
to music or podcasts. When I'm at home, I love, look at memes or cartoons or funny things that like give me a little sense of joy or a little giggle. When I'm at the office, I love to tell my team little jokes. Sometimes we have what we call Terrible Joke Tuesday, which is where I purposely tell the worst jokes you've never heard. We're talking about dad jokes that have been in the bottom of the barrel for 40 years or more. And again, they're so bad that, right, like people you get a little sympathy chuckle, and already I'm like, okay, we just helped your nervous system. Um, but yeah, so doing things that make people laugh is a big one for me. Another one is cold exposure.
Hmm.
That this is rapidly on the rise, advancing quickly due to, big names adopting this like Huberman and Joe Rogan. But cold exposure, and I think a lot of people when they think of cold exposure, the only thing they think of is like a full cold plunge, which is obviously a beautiful form of cold exposure.
Right.
Um, Also, cold showers are really good. And if that really deeply terrifies you and you're like, I can't do a plunge or a shower, I got to work my way up to that. Even something as simple as taking a bowl of ice water and just submerging your face for 5 or 10 seconds in it, or putting your hands in it for, 5 or 10 seconds if you're working the courage up or working your way up. Those are all things like putting ice on the back of your neck. Like those are all things
Yeah.
that again spark vagus nerve. They spark that parasympathetic, that calming reflex in the body. So cold exposure is another one of my favorites. um, really positive social interaction. That's a huge one, and especially coming out of, the pandemic, and some of us, in terms of in communities and stuff, especially people that are immune compromised, are really, really nervous about getting back into it. And I cannot overemphasize the importance of positive social interaction and triggering the nervous system that way by being able to co-regulate with people that you love and care about. And
Hmm.
so I'm always encouraging people to get around people that make them feel safe and comfortable, as a way of regulating their nervous system and decreasing stress and anxiety, finding ways to do that. And then the last one is, and if you're watching this or if you're listening to this and you're, even if you're driving, even if you're working, I would just encourage you for a second to close your eyes, take a nice deep breath in through your nose, breathe out through your mouth, right? And that breathing, just taking a couple minutes to do some focused breathing, deep inhale, slow exhale. That is absolutely for free. It costs you nothing. Brought to you by Physio Room. Okay. That is an amazing way to calm your nervous system. But yeah, those are a couple of my favorite ways to reduce stress in ways that are super easy, and functional to add in on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, and I love that list that you just came up with: laughter, cold exposure, having positive social interactions, and breathing exercises, which you could find a ton of different breathing exercises. In fact, back to, in the office, we're trying to impact the person's whole body and not just worry about the parts and the fuel. This was actually the homework or the home program that I just recommended for one of our clients last week. Was, here's a breathing exercise that I want you to do until each day until the next time that I see you. And I want to see if this has an impact on your symptoms. Because everything he was explaining to me had nothing to do with the parts and the fuel, right? He's already doing that stuff. He's doing those things correctly. He feels like the exercises help him. But as stressful, mostly work related conversations come into his mind, his symptoms come back. And his symptoms are very spine related, right? So central nervous system is highly involved in all that. I want you to talk on the cold exposure for just a moment, because I know that's something that you and I have in common, along with a few other people in our networking group that you mentioned that do some form of cold exposure, whether it's a plunge or a cold shower, on a at least semi-regular basis. What has been your personal, if we try to like take the science and the parasympathetic nervous system out of it for a moment, but just what has been your personal experience with implementing cold exposure into your life, and what have you noticed or what have you felt since you've been doing it?
Yeah, well, there's the obvious benefits that are spread far and wide, which are things like, better, activating your metabolism, right? Brown fat activation, losing the weight that you want to lose. Also increasing your body's resistance and ability to engage with thermodynamics, right? Like colder temperatures, you're less sensitive to changes in temperature. It's a great boost for the immune system. Obviously those are the low-hanging fruit of that. But I think one of the areas that it's really helped me the most, honestly, is in mindsets and discipline. Doing something, because I get asked all the time. In the beginning, when I first started plunging, my first plunge was pure adrenaline. I was
Yeah.
ignorance on fire. I had no clue what it was going to feel like. It was in the middle of winter. It was like end of January, beginning of February, and I was just so determined. I had seen multiple friends take it up, and I was like, it's gonna happen. And I, broke an inch of ice off the top of this little pool I bought from Amazon for $30 or whatever. And then I jumped in and had the most intense 2.5 minutes of my life. Cause I did not realize that like you can ease your way up to that. I'm a glutton for punishment. And I was like, we're doing 3 minutes right off the bat. Right. And I sat in there and I shivered my way through the experience. And again, like I said, pure adrenaline. I don't even know if I felt anything.
Yeah.
And I was just like, I'm doing it. And then I got out, and then the reality of what hit me, obviously, like my body's in shock. I towel off. And the next day I got up and I experienced physical like paralysis. Like I
Yeah.
could not get back in the second time. I was so nervous and so scared because I knew it was coming now. I knew how uncomfortable it would be. And
Mhm.
I literally called a friend crying. Like, I'm not ashamed to admit this. I called a friend crying and I was like, I can't do it. Like, I don't know how I did it the last night. I've tried 3 times today. I literally like get myself in my swimsuit. I'm ready to go. I will literally go out. I will stand there. I will even lift my foot to go in and then I freeze. I cannot touch the water.
Mhm.
And thankfully, for amazing friends, they were like, hey, like, we're going to be with you in this. We're literally going to stand there and watch you do it. And so I connected with them. I'm literally like, they watched me get in, and were like held that space for me, were accountable for me. And I got in. And after I got in the second time and I realized how much of a mental battle it was, then it became this ability to engage with myself. Like, can I do a hard thing that I don't want to do? And I get asked all the time, oh, well, did it get easier the more that you did it? Because I think I did it it was the first 4 months I didn't skip a single day. That was my
Yeah.
promise to myself, is I wasn't going to do a couple times a week until I built the habit. And so didn't skip a single day. I was doing it every day. By that point, I was up to like 5.5, like 6 minutes.
Nice.
And I was gradually increasing. I was just like, I just gotta do it. It's good for me, right? All these things. And they were like, well, does it get easier over time? And the answer is no. It doesn't get easier over time from a comfort standpoint. It is always uncomfortable. I've been doing it a year and a half now. It's still uncomfortable. I do not enjoy the feeling of hitting the cold water, but it got easier from the standpoint of I started becoming a person who did hard things even when it was uncomfortable. And I
Hmm.
cannot understate the importance of that commitment to self and showing up for self and the discipline of that, and how that positively translated to so many other areas of my life. In my work, when I had that piece of the job I did not want to do, right? The
Yeah.
paperwork, right? Whatever it is that's like we loathe entirely. In my life, when it was like having a tough conversation or setting a boundary with someone that I didn't want to set, but I became a person that did the hard thing, even though I didn't want to do it or didn't feel comfortable to do it. And that was probably one of the biggest things I took away and have still taken away from it. A year and a half later of doing it consistently, that's been a game changer for me that a lot of
Hmm.
people probably don't think about when they're like, I want to do this for health benefits. It's been one of my favorites.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that. And it's like, think of all the downstream effects like you're getting at that happen just from you spending 3 minutes doing something that is uncomfortable. Um, and I'm right there with you. I always feel like whether it's 30 seconds or whether it's several hours of calling friends, trying to talk yourself into getting into the ice bath because you know it's going to suck, right? You know that it's not going to be comfortable, especially if you put your hands in, it's going to
Right.
be uncomfortable. That portion of time to get yourself in there is always tougher mentally than the physical discomfort of actually sitting in there for a few minutes. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, that's uncomfortable. It's cold. You got to use your breathing exercises and take your mind to other places. But that's one of the things that I love about it the most is once you get in, all those thoughts go away. All
Yeah.
of the to-do list items that you have to do the rest of the day. Today's Tuesday, recording this. Like if I hopped in the ice bath right now, I would not think about all of the things that I have to do the rest of the day. All I'm
Right.
thinking about is breathing, relaxing, just listening to, sometimes I'll play a song or something and I'll
Yeah.
listen to that and I'll say, oh, I'm not going to count or look at the clock for 4 minutes. I'm going to sit in this ice bath for the duration of this one song. And when the song is over, I'll get out.
Yeah.
Um, and
It's a
it's,
practice in
yeah.
presence and
Mhm.
being fully in the moment.
Yeah.
And that is a lost art in today's society where there is a distraction at every corner, at every level. We're never or almost never not thinking about something, whether we're laying down our head on the pillow at night trying to figure out, did I turn off the coffee maker, right? Like whatever it is, right?
Hmm.
Or like, I answer that email, right? Whatever. There's always some distraction. When we're riding in our cars anymore, I've noticed like whenever I ride with friends, like nobody rides in a silent car anymore. There's always music playing, the
Yeah.
radio's on, or they're talking about something, right? We've really lost the art of being able to sit in silence and just appreciate the silence in the moment for what it is. And I think that that's why if you look at a lot of these, I say new, it's really like an old new spiritual gurus that you see promoted on Facebook, right? Like the Jay Shettys, right? And like all
Yeah.
these individuals like Tony Robbins even, these individuals incorporate massive amounts of silence, whether it's meditation, whether it's breathing exercises. Like they have learned to use silence to take away the noise for a second, to get fully present, and it allows them to be more grateful. It allows them to be more aware. It allows them to feel more connected, to feel more on purpose. And those are things that I think a lot of people are looking for, and they don't realize that by doing less, you can actually be more.
Yeah, yeah, the lost art of silence, and I'm totally, I don't know if I want to say guilty of that, but I fall into that camp where I do have a tough time with sitting in silence, not having multitasking and a lot of distractions and things going on. I think in a weird way, doing this podcast has actually helped me in that because I can't have a, active listening kind of conversation with someone if I'm trying to do four other things at the same time, like most people do when they're on a Zoom call or something like this.
Right.
But yeah, you're totally right. Getting into that cold exposure environment takes all those things away. And yeah, maybe that's what I'll try to do. I will try to do that without the music, without the podcast or whatever, and just use the 4 or 5 minutes of silence. I think one thing that I know to be true from clients asking me or from listeners of this podcast asking me, people like to know what other people are doing. Not that we don't have to all find what works for ourselves. We do. But I think there are so many different options out there of how somebody can incorporate cold exposure into their life. What type of cold plunge are you using these days? Like, how are you doing it? Do you have one that has a chiller? Do you have one that you're putting ice in? Do you just leave it outside in the winter? Like, what is your routine like right now?
Yeah, so I got one of the like the actual, I think the company literally called Plunge or the
Yeah.
Plunge. I got one of those, and it was only after I made a promise to myself that I wouldn't do it until I'd made, like I said, I made a habit out of it. So I gave myself 4 months without doing that. And then I just had a stock tank. I literally bought like 100-gallon stock tank from Ace Hardware store
Yeah.
and left it outside. And obviously in the wintertime in Colorado, that's a beautiful benefit that we have here is it's always going to be cold enough. And then as we got into the spring and the weather started warming up, I started needing to invest in ice. And I was like, okay, I'm buying like 20 to 30 bucks worth of ice every day or every 2 days. And I started calculating it out. I'm like, if I do this over the course of a year, I might as well invest in
Might as
something that's going
well.
to keep water cold.
Totally.
So I went with the plunge. If I could do it again in hindsight, I think I would have worked my way up to the plunge I have now. I kind of went like straight to the top. It's a really, I mean, there's so many really good ways of doing it. I would say, knowing what I know now, I probably would have gone with like one of those. I mean, it does not have to be expensive to get started. They've got these little companies on there where like $100, right? You can get this little pop-up like vinyl, plunge. And then for another maybe couple $100, maybe $300, you can buy a chiller. You literally just put the tubes in there and you can recycle the water through, keep it cold. I probably, in hindsight, I probably would do that if I could do it
Yep.
all over again, just to save some money in the upfront. And again, like just you can always grow into that. I use mine every day, so I'm not mad about it. Like it was a great purchase for me.
Yep.
But another reason why I got mine is I actually got the big version, the XL version, because two people can get in at a time. And
Hmm.
I love, love, love introducing my friends to the plunge, right? And it's so
Yeah.
much safer if they're like, I won't make you get in by yourself. Like I will get in with you.
Yeah.
And so being able to introduce people to and get them started on has been like kind of a passion project for me. But I would say if you're at home and you're saying like I don't have $7,000 or $8,000 to drop on something like this,
Yeah.
it's not pocket change. It can be pretty pricey. So I would suggest just starting somewhere. And any of those tiny little, pop-up ones, or like I said, I just got a stock tank. It was $100 from
Yep.
Ace Hardware store, and you could either buy your own little chiller, or I know some people are converting deep freezers for 300 or 400 bucks.
Hmm.
Like, there's really no bad way to do it.
Yeah, totally. And I did the exact same thing as you. I went the stock tank route. I actually even bought a freezer, a reversible, I guess you call it reversible, interchangeable freezer refrigerator for our garage for the sole purpose of freezing water bottles that I could reuse and put the frozen water bottles in the water. And I'm currently going through that debate, if you will, or that decision-making process right now as it's getting into summertime here, where it's much harder to keep that water cold.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going through that debate now of if I want to move into one of the ones with a chiller unit to add a small caveat or complicating factor to it or beneficial factor. The gym that one of our practices is located within just got a cold plunge, and it is a giant, oversized, uh, looks like what a freezer that got
Yep.
reversed into a cold plunge. So I'm using that now and just showing up at work a few minutes early, doing the cold plunge, and it's a great way to great thing to incorporate into your day. Now you teed this up great, Tim. You started to talk about you were having a hard time getting over that hurdle of getting yourself into the cold plunge, and you relied on some friends to talk you through and benefited from that accountability from someone else to help you do the hard thing that you know is going to positively impact so many other areas of your life. And then you just talked about this idea of community and accountability of bringing other friends over to get them to experience the cold plunge. Just talk on whether it's through, your fitness life or your business or doing hard things like this, just how important accountability and having other people as a support system has been for someone like you.
Oh gosh, I feel like it's been everything. Yeah, you touched on it. I mean, whether it's at work or it's in my personal life, we as human beings, one of the fundamental needs or really, two of the most fundamental needs, there's several, but two of the most foundational fundamental needs for human beings to thrive, not just survive, is number one, the need to grow in any or all areas of their life. And accountability is a huge process of growth because number one, accountability, it pushes people towards growth. Like it's a really good encourager of growth. But number two, it's also a good measurement of growth. One of my favorite analogies is like, when you have your own children and you're watching them every single day versus when your friends come over and see your children, right? And you never look at your child every day and say like, "Oh my gosh, you're so much bigger than you were yesterday," right? But your friend comes over a week later and they're like, "They've changed so much," right? So the accountability is there not only to encourage growth, but the accountability is there to help be a measuring stick of how far you've grown. And I think a lot of people gloss over that. They miss that. And the second fundamental foundational need for human beings, in addition to growth, that I believe in, is the need to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. It's the need to be a part of a group, of a team, of a community. And this is actually literally where we got the name TreeHive from, is growth and community put together. And so from an accountability perspective, what you do is you get to see yourself through a bunch of different mirrors, a bunch of different lenses, people that have different perspectives, different backgrounds than you. And they are going to be able to help you identify and point out blind spots that you just wouldn't be able to see in yourself. And
Mhm.
it is a phenomenal way to cut the learning curve. I know a lot of people that love to learn, but nobody likes to learn at the slowest pace.
Mhm.
Everybody's trying to find ways to hack, to improve, to grow, cut the curve, right? And so accountability, in my mind, it is one of the fastest and most efficient ways to learn and grow because you get to do it from a multiple perspective view instead of just only the ways that your creative mind and imagination can come up with.
Yeah, 100%. And like, we obviously don't have to look any farther than something that I feel like brings so many people together that so many people are interested in the world of athletics and sports. And,
Mhm.
being here in Colorado, we've got the Avalanche hockey team and the Nuggets basketball team, both in the playoffs, both doing well. Even though personally I'm not a fan of either team, it's still exciting to have the local teams in your community winning. It just uplifts everybody. But all of those people have coaches, right? All of those athletes from a very young age have had coaches that are there to shape and mold them and help them cut the curve, as you mentioned, to accelerate their skills and accelerate their growth curve. And we need that in our personal life or whatever that is also. We need coaches, we need resources, people that are helping to guide us and steer us in the direction that we are hoping to go. at least in fact, if we want to get there and we want to get there in a timely fashion and not just run into like obstacle after obstacle. Now, there are definitely times where I think learning by experience is beneficial. And, you have to go through some bumps and some bruises in
Right.
order to really appreciate the journey of getting to the outcome sometimes. But yeah, if you want to accelerate that, well, and we briefly talked about maybe asking you this question right before we hit record, but since we're on the topic, you have this awesome collection of color organized books behind you, right? And we've got the light colored ones on the top and the red and the orange and yellows on the second shelf and the darker blues and purples and whatnot below. Uh, Tim, what are some of the, now, whether it's on the topic of like accountability and growth or not, or just whether it's been some of your favorite books, like what are some of the books that you have read or listened to that if you were going to give recommendations to anybody on this podcast that you think have made like some of the biggest impacts on your life?
Oof, that's such a tough one. Well,
Now,
I
you've
get
read
to the color
hundreds and hundreds
coordinated
of books.
part. So I am, a lot of people don't know this. It's actually been, my mom knew this the whole time, which is really great. But I've just recently found out, I've kind of known I was wired a little weird most of my life, but I actually just recently, like within the past year, found out that I am on the autism spectrum. Very high functioning, but like really interesting nonetheless. So I have some different quirks and eccentricities. And one of them is I can get a little OCD at times. And so I had this bookshelf. It was bothering me for a long time. We're talking months and months and months. And one day I was having a lot of anxiety, and that was like one of my forms of like decreasing my anxiety is I go into like these random cleaning episodes and
Yeah.
organization episodes. And so that's the product of that, which is really funny to me because every time I look at it, I'm like, that was 8 hours of my life just literally organizing this bookshelf. But it gave me so much joy. Like my autism heart was very happy. But anyway, with that, from a book perspective, I love books. It used to be I was obsessive, and I can say that like with absolute accuracy. I was obsessive about studying communication. One of the wisest people I've ever met in my life when I was growing up told me something that still sticks with me to this day. And he said, if you want to be successful, if you want to make an impact, never get lazy with your language. And that always stuck with me. And so I have spent, it is not hyperbole to say, thousands of hours of studying and research and reading on how to become a better communicator. And it is so important to me because if you look at every great leader we've ever had, I mean, in any field, whether it was Steve Jobs or any of our presidents, right? Ronald Reagan's one of my favorites, right? All Nelson Mandela, all of these individuals had the ability to take feelings and experiences and translate them into written and spoken word. That is one of the primary traits of leaders that change the course of history. And so, one of my favorite books on communication, bar none, I recommend it to anybody who will listen to me for more than 30 seconds at a time. And that is, it's a book written by a guy named Chris Voss, Voss, like the water. And it's called Never Split the Difference. And he was a former FBI hostage negotiator and wrote a book on the rules to effective communication. And it is, to this day, it is one of my favorite books. I think I read it like once or twice a year. He also has a master class. If you have that app, I love master class. And he has a course on there, but it's called Never Split the Difference. That book changed the game for me when it came to communication.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of my favorites. Another, I love anything that is written or endorsed by Simon Sinek. I will read through and through, cover to cover. I think he has a phenomenal view of all things, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to personal growth, and really when it comes to like touching into like what deeply matters to human beings.
Yeah.
So really anything written by Simon Sinek, start with why, leaders eat last,
Yeah. Yeah.
all those things. Those are just some of my favorites. And then there's a new one, the newest one that I'm diving deep, deep into that has been radically transformational. It's kind of funny because it's shifted from pure communication, storytelling, right? All of these things into more of like okay, how do we use those tools to like make an impact and do something with Simon Sinek? And now I've swung the pendulum completely the opposite way to like just the bare bones of like, what does it mean to be a human being? Like,
Mm.
what does it mean to just show up authentically as yourself and be transparent? And that is, it's on Audible specifically. And I don't I think it's printed as a book, but I like to listen to it on Audible because it's actually her speaking in like a lecture format, is by Brene Brown, called The Power of Vulnerability. And obviously, she's someone who's very well known in the personal growth circles as someone who speaks on shame, someone who speaks on vulnerability and authenticity. But this series that she did, that I've been listening to on Audible, called The Power of Vulnerability, has so deeply touched me from the standpoint of, as human beings, how do we relate to our difficult experiences and our really big celebratory experiences, and how do we bridge the gap? How do
Yeah.
we create more compassion and more empathy in our conversations and in our connections with other people? And I find more and more that there's so many people out there that can be an amazing person, right? Even in our fields, there are incredible doctors. These are people that will know and understand and practice light years better than I will ever be, and they have the bedside manner of Attila the Hun, and they'll never make an impact, right? And so
Yeah.
it's like I'm realizing more and more how much of being a provider, being a friend, being a partner, being a son, is based off of what is my humanity, like what's my ability to connect with people at a people level, people serving people. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the spectrum of where I'm going or where I'm headed right now.
No, and I love that. And I think even looking at your bookshelf, sometimes I feel like I've read a lot of books, right? But looking at your bookshelf, I'm like, wow, I have some work to do. But what's cool is all four of the books that you just mentioned, Never Split the Difference, Leaders Eat Last, Start with Why, and The Power of Vulnerability. I have read all of those books and they're all phenomenal. And what you just reminded me of is you can go back and read books a second time or a third time or a fourth time. Because I think sometimes I have this tendency to like, I want to check the box and say, like, okay, I did that one. There are so many more out there. Now I need to move on to a different one.
Mhm.
But when we read a book more than once, we connect with it differently because we are a different person at the second time that we read it or the third time that we read it. And we're going to pick out different things. I actually just read Leaders Eat Last a couple months ago for the second time. And I'm someone who likes to highlight or underline things. So I'm going back, seeing some of the highlighting spots that I made the first time through that book, which was several years ago. And now I find myself highlighting different spots because different words and phrases are jumping out and standing out to me because I'm in a very different place in my life. But no, I couldn't agree more. I think those four books are awesome. And on the communication part that you mentioned, back to what I said before, I think that's basically what I mean about our team at Physio Room or your team at TreeHive or any other provider or personal trainer or whoever that is you could be the greatest, most skilled person in the world at your craft. But if you cannot communicate and if people do not like to work with you because of how you interact with them, you're just not going to have the impact that you could. Now, that doesn't mean you won't have a schedule of people. That doesn't mean you can't have a very good career, but your impact is not going to be as large as it could be if you marry those two things together very well, the great skill set and the great communication. And to tie this whole thing together, back to the stand-up comedy and the impact on the vagus nerve. My wife and I, Erin, we were watching a stand-up comedy skit somewhat recently. I think it's a few years old. And the comedian, his name is Trevor Noah.
All right.
And he was talking about communication and he was imitating several presidents. And you just said Ronald Reagan, and that made me think of this, is we were just hysterically laughing when he was imitating presidents. And what he was getting at is in order to become the president of the United States, you have to talk weird. And what he meant by that is like you have to talk in a way that is not so monotone that people's ears perk up and they have to work to like they have to pay attention to listen to you. And he goes through and he's imitating names like Barack Obama and Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and George Bush and he's just doing such a great job imitating them. But then he's just making a joke out of it the whole time like who talks like this? This is not normal communication. But all of these people were in extremely powerful, influential positions, in large part probably be due to how they communicate and how they can take feelings and words and put the emotion behind them and how they communicate things. So yeah, I think the books that you mentioned are great. And I don't know that this ties in perfectly, but one of the things that I wanted to ask you, and I think communicate like the reason I'm bringing this up in communication is because this word is often used. Something that I've heard you speak about before that I think is so important to wrap this whole mindset together, how we take care of our health, how we communicate with other people, how we hold ourselves and other people accountable, is the word should.
Hmm.
I should do this. I should be better at this. This should happen. And I know, I think someone has, I've heard you talk about this before, about the word should is really it's a judgment that we're placing upon ourselves because of the way that we feel about something. And I would just love for you to speak on that for just a minute about, I'm sure you have heard clients say, well, I should do this. I should be able to do that. This should feel better. And you talked about earlier, like, doctor, please cut me open and fix this problem. Like, we should be able just to fix this.
Mhm.
But we know that it's a practice that we have to constantly be evolving and working at. And yeah, I'll quit rambling and let you try to chime in there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of my favorite things to talk about because I do feel like I feel like it's a form of an epidemic, and I say that even, carefully because I think a lot of us are shutting ourselves. And really what I take away from that is um in all of our minds, we create a blueprint. And the blueprint is this idea of what we believe life needs to look like to be satisfied, to be happy, to be fulfilled. And for most of us, we get the information for this blueprint. We get the actual blueprint itself from watching people around us, whether it's as a child, we watch and see what our parents do or don't do, or what brings them joy or brings them sadness and sorrow. And then as we grow up, we watch our peers in school, and then we go into our workplaces and watch our coworkers and our bosses and managers. And then as we get further and further in life, we're always looking around us, whether it's social media, it's on the TV, for these ideas of what to add to our blueprint that's going to bring us happiness. It's going to bring us joy. It's going to create the life that we want for ourselves. And then what we do is we look at our life as is presently constructed, and we're always comparing it to this blueprint. And this is most often when I hear someone use the word should, it means there's a difference between this blueprint of what they believe life needs to look like and what they're actually experiencing. And should is a form of disappointment, right? Most often it's an assessment of disappointment. And I am a massive proponent and advocate for people practicing two things in their daily life. One is a space of um, personal responsibility, and that is
Mhm.
everything that life, I am at cause for everything in my life. And this is a really difficult one for a lot of people because, there's certain circumstances that say, where people might say, well, this was completely outside of my control, right? Like maybe somebody getting cancer. And yet, even still, I would say to them, right, that person that got cancer, like a deeply regrettable situation, I would say that there are areas in which they could take personal responsibility for their life. Were they watching their diet? Were they making sure that they were not holding their cell phone like in their back pocket all the time and decreasing radiation? Were they, consistently making sure that they were, that they had checked their home for areas of radiation or things like that, right? Like, and most often, even the person that has been, so sadly and tragically stricken with cancer, there's some blind spots. There's some areas where they could have done things differently to increase their responsibility in that situation. So even in the most tragic of circumstances, there's a lot of room for personal responsibility that we're not taking. And so that's the first thing I invite everybody to take into is I am at cause or I am at choice for my experience. Always, 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 always. Okay. Then the second piece of that is non-judgment. And when I think of this a lot of times, I think of non-judgment as the space between these two phrases. Number one, this is how it is, right? Or this is the reality of the situation. And number two, the phrase, and there is more.
Mhm.
And it won't always be like this. And something else can happen, right? And so non judgment is the space in between those two. It's not sitting in the space of this is just how it is. It will always be this way. It will never change. It's always been this way, right? That's a form of judgment, right? And then you have your people on the opposite side that are never living in the present. They're always like, well, there's going to be this thing coming up, or it could be like this, or this could change, right? And again, this is a judgment of where they're at based on where they want to be.
Mhm.
Non-judgment is this beautiful contentment and space in between those two. And really where I find most people are actually not very judgy people. when they look at other people, right? Like I have a feeling that like if we went through our networking group that we're both a part of, we could look around that room and be like, oh man, like this person is so good at not judging other people. This
Yeah,
person's so good at being non-judgmental. And we forget that the person that we judge the most and the harshest is ourselves.
totally.
Yep. And so this is where I have everybody take a personal look at themselves and say, like, where are you judging you, right? And one of my favorite ways to do this is I like to put them through a little exercise, and I'll say, I want you to think about someone that deeply loves and cares about you the most, right? And I just want you to think about that, think about how good it feels, how they love you, how they care about you, how they don't judge you. And then I want you to bring up yourself. Do you love and care for yourself and not judge yourself the same way that they do? And if
Mm,
not, where's the difference between those two? Like, where's the discrepancy there between
mm,
how you see you and how they see you? Because
yeah,
that's an area for growth right there. And so when people get to understand that and they get to realize that, they understand that the word should is an automatic judgment of self. Again, that's that measure of disappointment. And my encouragement in this situation, there are two ways that you can engage with a should. There's two ways when your life doesn't match the blueprint, right? By the time I'm 35, I should be living in a house that I own. I should be married. I should have 2.5 children. I should have X amount of money in the bank, right? And I should be driving a, Lexus, whatever, right?
yeah,
This is my blueprint of what I've told myself life needs to look like, that at 35, I can be happy and successful. And you might find yourself at 34 and you're still living in an apartment and you're driving a Honda Civic, right? And you have no spouse or partner and no children, right? And all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, 35 is next year. I'm way far off from my blueprint.
hmm,
I should have been this. Oh, this should have, if only I had, right? All these things, you get these judgments, right? There's two ways
totally.
to engage with this. Number one is you can settle. And this is where a lot of people build a very unfulfilling life for themselves. And they'll say, okay, well, in order to own a house by the time I'm 35, I'm going to buy this dump on the outskirts of town. I'm going to have to drive an hour anywhere I want to go. But at least I own a house, right? I fit my blueprint. In order to have a partner, I'm going to settle for the first person that even shows me a flash of attention. But I have a partner, right? And we're going to go ahead and adopt 2.5 children like really quickly, even though we're not ready to be parents yet, right? Like you could settle and find ways to meet
Hmm.
your blueprint. And then you can tell yourself like, oh, I got my blueprint, but you're going to be miserable because it's not actually what you really wanted. Or what I encourage people to do is the second option, which is really, can you evaluate your blueprint and give yourself permission to throw the blueprint away? Like, can you give yourself permission to just be super present and fulfill with where you're at right now, realizing, right, this is the space in between. Yes, today I am what I am and I'm where I'm at. And there is more. And there will be more coming. In that beautiful space in between, can you occupy that space in between? Throw away the blueprint. It doesn't need to look like everyone else. It doesn't need to look like all your friends on social media who are married and have the kids and have the house and all those things. Can you be okay with the fact that where you're at today is not where you're always going to be? And there is more. Okay. And if people can really adopt that and they can sit in that space and really and really learn to love that in between, it's just this beautiful space of freedom that I'm discovering more and more of every day, far
Mm.
from perfect in, but encouraging people to step into it. It's been some really cool stuff.
Man, I think you explained that in a beautiful way because you're 100% right. I definitely fall into this. I don't judge anyone as hard as I judge myself, right?
Yeah.
I don't critique anyone as hard as I critique myself. If somebody makes a mistake, it's not that big of a deal unless it's me making the mistake. That's something that could have been avoided, right? Oh, if I would have just remembered to do this. Oh, if I wouldn't have dropped that, this wouldn't have happened. And I'm more hard on myself than I am on anybody else. And I'm learning that life's going to go on. It's going to be okay, right? And I feel like, it's only been a few months, but having a newborn has made me realize that stuff is not always going to get done at exactly the time that I hoped and planned for it to get done. And I just have to be okay with that. And I'm learning to give myself a little bit more grace and a little bit more what's like understanding when things don't go according to the blueprint, according to the plan, exactly how I had laid it out. And I think that's really good for me. I feel like I do a good job going with the flow. However, I like to have a structure and I like to have a plan in place, and then I can modify from it. I don't like to just have no plan whatsoever.
Well, and I'm glad you brought that up because there's a difference between a blueprint and a plan, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think having a plan is beautiful. Having a North Star, a compass that you're working towards. The difference in one of the phrases I like to use most is a phrase that goes like this: high intention and low attachment, right? That's the
Mm-hmm.
difference between a plan and a blueprint. A plan is an ideal. This is something that I'm working towards. It's a vision that I have for my future, but the difference between that and a blueprint is I will not be satisfied or happy until I get there, right? And I have to get there by this point in time, and it has to look this way. Whereas a vision is I understand the direction I'm working towards, and I'll get there the way and when I need to get there. Like that, I'm a little bit less attached to, as long as I know I'm working and trending in the direction that I need to feel good about where I'm going, if that makes
Mm-hmm.
sense.
No, it makes perfect sense. And I appreciate you sort of distinguishing between those couple words, plan and blueprint, because it all comes back to the mindset of like, how do you feel about something
Right.
is greatly impacted by your mindset of going into it. And I notice that now, even with, the how our day unfolds, having little Aiden around is like, if I go into the day saying I should do these things, and then those things don't happen, I get frustrated.
Mhm.
I should have gotten this done. I should have gotten that done. But if I go into the day with a vision of things that I hope to accomplish, and I just do the best that I can and get done exactly what I can get done in the time and space allowed, great. I did the best that I could, and I will move on and we'll go to sleep and we'll wake up the next morning and we'll start moving towards those things again, the things we didn't get done. We'll retumble the clothes that are in the dryer and we'll fold them tomorrow if we don't fold them today. I think the mindset of how you feel, like how you're going to feel, how you are going to feel is greatly impacted by the mindset you have going into the situation. And if we just think about doing the best that we can in all the situations instead of what we should become, what we should do, how our life should unfold, I think that makes a huge, huge difference. And honestly gives us, I think, a great place to kind of like start the process of wrapping this conversation up because we are all going to have things that we want to improve in our life. We started this conversation talking about the medical system and our health, whether that is we have things in our health that we want to try to improve. We then talked a little bit about cold exposure and whatnot, things that are like in the fitness community, right? Fitness and health and wellness. Everyone could be in better shape than what they currently are. Even the most fit people in the world could still be in better shape, right? Because there is no end point. There's no like pinnacle that you just reach this and now you can't get any better. It's a game that we are constantly playing with our health and our fitness to constantly try to be better than we were the day before. And then we started talking about personal development and communication and how to be better communicators, how important it is to have support systems and accountability groups in our life that are there to help us in times of need, and then how to combat using the word should. And like the phrase you said, we need to stop shoulding ourselves. And I think that is so great and so funny.
Yeah.
And ultimately we have a choice, right? So I guess to the listeners, I want to leave you with that of, what choices do you have to make today that you're going to take responsibility for? Are there things that you need to get done today? And are you going to make it a priority and take responsibility for whether you do them or whether you don't? And what, I guess, how do I want to phrase this question? Like, and what acknowledgement or what grace or what mindset are you going to come at that to yourself with? Because we talked about no one is going to be more judgy or critiquing on you than you are. It's not going to be your mom. It's not going to be your spouse. It's surely not going to be your newborn child sitting at home. Like you can't do anything wrong in their eyes. But it's ourselves that we are the most hard on ourselves. And we're the ones, I think, that put a lot of this stress and other things on us every single day. It's not the other people in many situations. It's how we feel about the things that we have to do and whether we get them done or not. So I thought this conversation was awesome, Tim. And I want to make sure that everybody that tuned in and was so gracious to spend time with us and listen to this podcast episode knows where that they can find and get a hold of you if they want to. What's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, good question. I would say if you're wanting to listen to more of my rants and ravings, I'm on the podcast, really where you can find any podcast. It's called The Ideology, Ideaology podcast. Or on social media, our page is TreeHive Chiro, TreeHive I personally do not have any of my social media right now, but I may bring it back in the near future. I'm thinking about it, in which case you can just find me if you're listening to this later on. Find me at Dr. Tim Zittle, Zittle. But outside of that, yeah, I'm always around, easily accessible. Just look me up online or look up our office online, and someone will know how to get me.
No, this is great. And again, I really appreciate your time carving out some time for us this morning and now into the afternoon, Tim, to do this podcast. For all of you guys that tuned in to listen, we've been planning this for a long time, and we both have busy schedules and there's lives to coordinate, and we had to reschedule this a few times, but I'm glad that we were finally able between the two of us to get this to work. Um, and who knows, maybe there'll be a second installment of this conversation at some point, because in no way, shape, or form did we uncover all that there is to uncover on the topics that we stepped into today. We just barely scratched the surface on all these things, health and communication and whatnot. So again, for all of you that tuned in to listen to this episode of The Code, really appreciate your time. Whether it is your first time with us or you've been here for many episodes, can't thank you enough. And you know that getting this show out to more and more people is one of the ways that we're going to spread the impact of these messages. One of the best ways to do that is, if you've not already done so, leave a review on this podcast. We are trying to get up to 200 5-star reviews, whatever platform you use, Spotify, Apple, or whatever it is, to listen to this. Please go drop a review on there. Ask us some questions. You can find all of my contact information. And if you have a question for Dr. Tim and you can't find his info for some reason, send it to me. We'll make sure we get it over there. But thank you again, Dr. Tim. Hope you have an awesome rest of your day, man. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks. Appreciate you.
All right, guys, we'll catch you on another episode of The Code. Thanks again.